Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Insight with Political Tours, the travel company led by reporters. When British voters went to the polls in 2016 and voted by a narrow margin for Brexit, it's a safe bet to say that few of them would have been thinking about the future of Northern Ireland. But arguably, that's the area of the UK that has been most affected by leaving the European Union. The border that was effectively done away with by the Good Friday Agreement has been reinstated, causing considerable political upheaval, most notably among Unionists. Today, we're going to look at that border with the photographer Andrew Testa, whose work is most frequently seen in the New York Times. Hello and welcome, Andrew.
Hi, Nick. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you very much. We are in sunny South Africa. You're in miserable London. We also have with us, we may have with us standing by Billy Graham, but we're having a bit of problems getting up his signal. Billy is our veteran expert and former reporter with the Irish News in Northern Ireland. And we're hoping to have him to talk just a few questions about that tricky question of the border. But Andrew, we're going to look at your work in just a second. And you've been studying this project. Just tell us about the project. How long have you been working on it for?
So I first went to Northern Ireland in 1998, actually. That was for the Observer newspaper, but then went other places, went to the Balkans, covered wars over there. And then it wasn't really until 2016. I went back in 2012 to do a couple of stories, and kind of noticed how little had changed. I was kind of really amazed when I went to Belfast that the graffiti was all still there, the peace walls were all still there. But then once Brexit was on the cards, I did a road trip for the New York Times where I drove the whole border. And that really, I kind of thought, okay, this is crazy. You know, this idea that we're going to leave the EU and this will become a hard border. And then when Theresa May made a speech where she said that we would leave the single market and the customs union, but we would not put a hard border up on Northern Ireland, that's when I realized that those two things could never be in the same sentence. You couldn't leave the EU and not have a hard border, an external EU hard border. So that's when I thought, okay, this is not going to work. Yeah. Brexit can't happen. Therefore, I'm going to go and have a look at this.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's obviously a very real premise. Billy, I'm just going to check on your sound. Can we hear you?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Fantastic. Great. Good to have you with us. I'm so glad. Billy, we were just talking about that border, and the whole issue with the Good Friday Agreement was that it did away with borders. Now let's just bring up that border so people can see it, and I'm going to show it here. And essentially, Billy, not this one here, but here we go. Hang on a second. I think everyone can see. Can you all see that, everyone? That's the old Northern Irish border with the Republic of Ireland and all those crossing points. So, Billy, just to state the obvious, the Good Friday Agreement did away with that, didn't it?
Yeah, essentially, we had an invisible border, so to speak. Previous to that, we had watchtowers there. We had customs, some customs posts, etc., and all that went and was dismantled after the Good Friday Agreement.
But the issue there was that when the Brexit vote took place, obviously the majority of people by a small margin in the UK voted to leave the European Union, but that wasn't the case in Northern Ireland, was it?
No, as you say, the majority of people in the Brexit voted to leave, but have to remember that Northern Ireland voted 55.8% to 44.2% to stay in the European Union, and Scotland, of course, and Greater London also voted to stay in the EU, and parts of England and Wales voted to leave. So we were left with a very, very difficult position after this vote. And of course, Brexit did have an impact on the Good Friday Agreement and actually upset things a little bit, upset the arrangements, the complex political arrangements that were made after Good Friday.
Okay, so just to state the obvious, I'm just going to share the next screen. If you're going to leave the European Union, that means you've got to reinstate the border somewhere. And so the compromise that is agreed just at the beginning of this year is that there is a border down the Irish Sea, and so that all goods. Hang on a second. I think I need to stop the share. I don't think I can show you the same screen again. Let me just show you here. There we go. There we go. Got the right screen here. So the new border is down the Irish Sea, centre of the Irish Sea, and goods are being checked. So the essential point was that with the Good Friday Agreement, you had no border, but leaving the European Union means you're reinstating the border. And they decided to put the agreement with the European Union is to put the border down the Irish Sea, and goods coming from the UK essentially, in theory, have to be checked as they come into Northern Ireland. Who's unhappy about that, Billy?
Well, going back to the Good Friday Agreement and the doing away basically with the border, then after Brexit, there was a kind of to and fro arguments about where should we put the border, should we put in fact a land border? But really, if you had have put a land border there after Brexit with new customs posts and all that military machinery behind it, I would have predicted that people would have come with their bare hands and actually tore down the customs posts because they would have been so enraged after all the arrangements made under the Good Friday Agreement. So then they moved to this idea, we'll put it down, we'll put a line down the Irish Sea. And in fact, I live in Rostrevor County down here, and I look across the loch, and there is a sea loch here. You can't see the line on the loch, but I can look across to the mountain there and see Europe. But anyway, they put the border down the Irish Sea. Then this whole thing upset Unionists to an extent that they believed that by doing this, that this was actually changing the status of Northern Ireland as part of UK GP, and that it was interfering or diminishing their sovereignty. So that's why they were really so upset. And since then, so they've been trying to get the government to make changes to the protocol, and those arguments, discussions are still going on. And of course, we now have the Windsor Protocol, which basically means that goods are checked at various ports in Northern Ireland, and green lines and red lines are introduced in terms of goods coming into Northern Ireland from GP and goods travelling on to Southern Ireland via Northern Ireland.
Okay, well, there are obviously two things going on there. There's the sort of technical side of things, was to check on goods coming to Northern Ireland where that physical border is, and the political ramifications of that, which is obviously about the future of Northern Ireland, and particularly if you're a unionist, you see yourself being cut off from the UK. So that obviously the conundrum left by Brexit's a huge one, and that's what we're going to look at now with Andrew's photos, and we're going to see various aspects of this, both at a sort of really at a community level, at a street level. Billy, thank you very much for joining us. I know we had difficulties getting there, but we've managed to pull it together between between Northern Ireland and your loch there, South Africa, where we are, and London. Thank you very much, Billy.
Yes.
So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Andrew is going to draw up his screen, and we'll get going. So the first series of photos, when do they date back to, Andrew?
This series is they're going to be, let me see. So from probably 2017 onwards, I'd say, the border stuff. This is This is a mountain called Kulka Mountain. So the border runs just behind this guy, just behind my position. The border runs along and then comes down towards the left of the photo over the loch down there. Billy was right when he said it was an invisible border. It's after the sort of structures were taken down, you really couldn't, and under the Good Friday Agreement, and when we were part of the EU, it's very difficult to actually see that there was a border there. The only way you can usually tell is the speed signs go into kilometers as you enter Ireland, and the tarmac usually changes the quality of the tarmac. You can just, if you stop and get out of your car and have a look, you'll see there's a road. But otherwise, it's as if there's no border whatsoever. This is a guy who lives in this kind of rundown house. This is near Crossmaglen. So if people know about the Troubles, Crossmaglen was a very pro-IRA area. They used to call it bandit country. It's down on the border with the Republic. Very heavy IRA activity around here. And these roads, you saw on the map previously, the 208 road crossings. I mean, there's more road crossings on the Irish border than there are on the entire eastern border of the European Union. So the way that the British used to control that border is that they would blow up the smaller roads. They would put concrete barriers, or this road that next to this guy's place, they used to blow it up. Then it became a sort of cat and mouse because the locals would come and fill in the holes, and then the British Army would come back and blow it up again. Again on the border, it's first time I drove the border in 2016. I didn't have Google Maps. I had a proper sat nav, and driving this stretch, I think this is between Cavan and Clones. My sat nav would tell me that I was entering a different country. You know, if you remember the old sat navs, when you entered a different country, it would come up with the speed limits, everything. And as you're driving this little stretch, it would happen about 8 or 9 times that it would change, and because the road just crisscrosses between the United Kingdom and the Republic. Again, right on the border. This is about 1 kilometer away from the border, and that you can see some hard standing in the foreground. And this was a British Army base for years. The British would control all the high points along the border. I've actually just forgotten where this one is, but all that's left of the British Army base is the hard standing. So what they've done here is they're sort of trying to reintegrate these areas into the local communities and building new housing blocks and children's playgrounds and things. But the traces, you see the little traces around the place, bits of kind of wall, bits of barbed wire. It's interesting to see how it came from an area that was so heavily controlled. Now something that's a relic of the past. But that may be on the border. This is in Belfast. This is in between the Falls Road and the Shankill Road. This is on the Catholic side. Falls Road is Catholic. The Shankill Road is Protestant. This is one of the peace walls that still remain. There's still quite a number of peace walls around. They had a plan.
I was looking at this. It's a staggering number. And in actual fact, there are more, they're called peace walls. There are more peace walls now than there have ever been. So they've actually erected more and more over time.
Yes.
So even since the Good Friday Agreement and also since Brexit. And I think I'm right in saying, and Billy may correct me, they're mainly in working class communities, obviously dividing the Protestant community from Catholics, or nationalist from loyalist.
Sure. Well, this is exactly what this one is, and this is like one of the biggest ones. That's 45 feet high. That peace wall, and sometimes it's a fence, sometimes it's a wall, but it runs for a substantial distance. And you're right, they put up more. The plan was to take them down. They've taken maybe a dozen down, but more have gone up. And and Brexit, I think, definitely made that worse because it sort of these kind of entrenched. It's really interesting when you go to Ireland. If you go when they call these areas interface areas, so these are areas where the two communities meet. If you go further up, say into Larne, you'll find that people are, you don't get the same aggression or the same entrenched attitudes that you get in the interface areas. So since Brexit and what Brexit did, Brexit allowed the paramilitaries to exert pressure on their communities and to say to them once more, you've got to choose. Because before Brexit, there was the Alliance Party was growing. There was a third way. People were not really identifying by religion or.
The most simple, it put a question mark over the future of the province,
sure.
With Unionists obviously feeling cut off from the UK.
Yeah.
And the whole, if you have the idea of putting that border, reinstating the border again, reasserts national identities.
Sure, and it allowed the paramilitaries on both sides to say, okay, you've got to choose. Forget all this nonsense about going the third way, and you've got to choose your community, and you've got to stand with us against. If you were.
But what you were saying was you're feeling this particularly in the areas you focused on, which is the.
Sure.
Where you can see the split or where the border is.
Kind of interface areas. This is Derry. This is the Bogside. So what you were saying about very working class, these areas are not. The Bogside is a very kind of working class area. They've never had that much money. The whole idea of the Bogside was that it was the sort of nasty, boggy area outside the city walls in Derry, which is where they forced all the Catholics to live. But if you're in the Bogside, your daily life. So this reads PSNI, which is Police Service Northern Ireland /RUC Royal Ulster Constabulary. What the PSNI used to be, watch your backs. This is basically the Republican paramilitaries telling the police that they're still around, they're still active. Again, this is in Derry again. So this is from an IRA message: drug dealers, time's up. So there's been a lot of talk that the IRA and the Protestant paramilitaries these days make their money from drugs and drug dealing, but I think the IRA are sort of, they want to be seen as a benevolent organization, one that sort of enforces justice in their communities and not people who are responsible for the destruction of those communities, if you see what I mean. And that's still very prevalent. The sort of the kneecapping, the street justice that goes on with both communities to quite alarming degree. I think there's still hundreds of punishment shootings and beatings every year. This is in Derry. This is the Catholic part of town. This is Cregan. So this is seen as quite a hardline Republican area. Again in Cregan, this is a little kids' party. This building, actually, you're never really far away from the Troubles here. So this is now a squatted community centre, and Cromarr, I think it's called. But during the Troubles, 2 IRA men killed themselves. They blew themselves up here in this car park when they were making bombs. And another IRA man was shot dead by the British Army out the front. So the history of the IRA in these areas is very strong. Back on the border, this is over into the Republic now. This was a safe house. We got a taxi. I was working for the New York Times, and the taxi driver who was showing us around said, "Come on, I'll show you something." And he took us down some back country roads to this place. So this was a safe house used by the IRA. So some IRA men, once they'd done attacks in the north, would cross the border and come and hide for a while here until things were safe for them to go back. So East Belfast, Loyalist area, Unionists. This is a new, or relatively new, what you call it, not wall art, but this is by the Ulster Volunteer Force. And this really, since Brexit and since when you go to Northern Ireland now, when I first went in 2016, I was asking people, do you think Brexit's going to cause Ireland, the unification of Ireland? And people were kind of laughing at me for asking the question. Very quickly that changed. When Brexit happened, you know, the level of anger about Brexit. I mean, the Unionists wanted Brexit. The Unionists kind of thought, we want a hard border back. I don't know why they thought that, because that was never going to be allowed to happen. And if they put a hard border up, as Billy said, that people would have torn it down with their bare hands. But what has now happened is that now when you go to Northern Ireland and drive that border, you won't find anyone who will say that a unified Ireland is not a done deal. It's kind of a done deal. So what has now happened with the Unionists is that that's an existential crisis for them. They see that as a huge threat to their identity. So this is the UVF statement of intent. The prevention of the erosion of our identity is now our priority. So this is the fight as they see it now, which is to preserve their Britishness in the face.
They all voted for Brexit, well, the vast majority of them did. And they were sold down the river by the Conservatives, by Johnson's government.
Well, not only that, but the DUP, I mean, there was all that money that the DUP sort of sent. Do you remember a huge amount of money came through the DUP, and no one's ever got to the bottom of that. But yeah, they did. They voted Brexit. And I don't know if they really considered the logical consequences of it. This is in Larne. So this is not near the border. I mean, when I say Borderlands, it's the borders between the communities as well. This is sort of the heart of Protestantism, really, Larne. But funnily enough, here, I found people, talking to people, they're actually more conciliatory towards the Republic, to Catholics, than they were closer to the border. This is the 12th of July. This is actually the 11th of July. They do these bonfires, and the one in Larne is traditionally the largest in Northern Ireland. They have a little competition going, but they are absolutely enormous. And they make the thousands and thousands of pallets. And I was talking to a guy, he said, Northern Ireland is the only country in the world where when the fire brigade come, they turn away from the fire. And that's literally what happens, because these fires get so hot, they're in danger of melting the glass of all the nearby houses. So the fire brigade rock up, and because these bonfires are all organised by the paramilitaries, they're organised by the Ulster Volunteer Force, etc., the firemen won't put the fire out. They'll stand with their backs to the fire and dose and pour water all over the nearby houses. Kind of crazy.
I saw one in North Belfast in the Catholic area, and it was almost as high as the small tower blocks next to it.
Yeah.
And you were just waiting for it to fall down. They must have degrees in engineering to keep them up as well.
Yeah, I think a guy died last year. He fell off of one. The Larne one, that is impossibly high. I mean, it's crazy. A guy died, he fell off. So here we are at Derry. So when I went in 1998, this is the Apprentice Boys March in Derry. This was the cause of a huge amount. This is really why I went in 1998, because there was the Protestant community were threatening to hold this march. And these are the Derry walls. And in the background there, you've got the Bogside. So, this is how sort of Derry was set up. The Protestants, centuries ago, Protestants all lived within the city. Catholics were down in the Bogside. And when I went in 1998, this was a massive point of disagreement between the two communities, and there was going to be a huge, huge fight over this. So I went over, and I was down on the Bogside, and there were all the Catholic demonstrators were down there, and it was looking like it was going to get really, really nasty. And then Martin McGuinness came and stood up on a little podium, and he raised his arms, and he said, "We've made an agreement. Everyone, go home." And literally, the entire crowd turned around and they all went home, and that was it. Somehow they kind of sorted out an agreement, and now it's much more peaceful. Now, what happens now? The Catholic community, just down the hill here, is the museum, the Bloody Sunday Museum, organised by the relatives of people who are
literally over the wall and down the drop there.
Yeah, it's down the drop there. So they organise, what happens as the Catholic community will organise coaches and get their young people out of town when the march happens. And in that way, they kind of reduce the possibility of any violence. This is the first march of the season. This happens actually in the Republic of Ireland, a place called Rosnowla. And the Unionists all come over the border and they march through the Republic and then they march down to the beach, and they kind of all relax for a bit and get drunk, and then they all go home. But that usually happens a week before the main marching season.
The thing that struck me, I saw one of these marches in Edinburgh, and this was about the time of 2014, the time of the independence vote, and you forget that Scotland too has a Protestant Catholic divide, and you think of Rangers and Celtic. And chatting to some of the bandsmen, that was mainly bandsmen, up near the castle in Edinburgh, the amount they've spent from their age 5 or 6 learning to play the pipes, the drums, and the amount of money as well that goes into their uniforms, stitching, embroidery, look like very much looking like guardsmen. So it's a huge thing. It's a real, really embedded in the community, and a huge amount goes into it.
It's massively embedded in the community, and it's not just the march, not just around the 11th of July, the Battle of the Boyne. This is on the 1st of July. This is to commemorate the Somme. So in Northern Ireland, the First World War has kind of been weaponized, even though both Catholics and Protestants fought in the First World War. It is the Protestants who celebrate and commemorate the war dead. So when you're driving through Northern Ireland, if you see a First World War commemoration, that is very much a Protestant thing. The Protestant community have taken that. So this is actually, this is on 1st of July parade, and there's about 90 odd parades throughout Northern Ireland on 1st of July to commemorate the Somme. This is in the Shankill Road, so very hardcore loyalist, unionist area. They do not see themselves as, well, they see themselves as British, but they are Ulster Scots. So they're not, that's how they identify. This is a woman called Mrs. Michelhigger. I always go and see her because she looks lovely until she opens her mouth, and then it is a stream of hatred that comes out. Her husband had just died, and you mentioned Rangers and Celtic. Her husband was an avid Rangers fan and would travel over to Scotland, always to see Celtic. But last time I saw her, there had been some trouble at the Peace Wall, and she was explaining to me how their lads had caught some Catholic lads and how badly they'd beaten them. And her parting words were, "I don't care what they do to them as long as our side win."
I know we've got quite a few more photographs to look through, but I do want to encourage people to start asking questions. So if you've got a question for Andrew or even for Billy's still here, please do put a question in the Q&A box. So just type your question in the Q&A box, and we can put your questions directly to our speakers. And I'm going to come to Billy in a second, because I know despite some of this seems very pessimistic, we're not seeing the violence that existed, anything like the violence or the risk of the violence that existed during the Troubles. But this is deeply political. But I know that Billy's perhaps a bit more positive about the future trajectory and direction, and I'll come back to Billy in a second. But go on, Andrew.
So again, unionist area, you get this kind of graffiti: no EU, no Irish, buy British. When you're talking to people on the Catholic side and you ask them about unification, they sort of say, yeah, it's coming, but the real problem is that the sort of hardcore of the loyalist community, the Ulster Scots, they will always be a problem, because they don't, when you talk to them, they're incredibly racist against Irish people. They don't even like the English very much. They sort of see themselves as British, but they're Ulster Scots, and they are really. I think that in Ireland, that it's going to have to be some kind of. Their fears are going to have to be dealt with somehow. They're going to have to be brought on board. Otherwise,
yeah. Billy, you make the distinction, don't you? Billy, you still there?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, you make a distinction between United Ireland and a new Ireland. What do you mean by a new Ireland?
Well, United Ireland is a term that was used quite a few years ago, but a new Ireland is they're trying to politicians are trying to figure out how they can get or design a piece of political architecture that is going to encompass all shades of opinion and kind of create a home place for everyone in in the island, north and south.
So in
How
other
this
words,
works
that
out,
new Ireland has to
it's going to take a lot of
perhaps a
time,
British
a lot of
sense of
research.
identity.
I mean, papers, analysis, financial analysis, for example, on the NHS, on pensions, all those kind of economic factors. Those papers really have still not been prepared in detail. So we're just at the very beginning of a discussion about how we live together and share this home place.
Got it.
So the previous photo of the was in Omagh. No, it wasn't. It was in Bally. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, that was the Protestant celebration of St. Patrick's Day, and then in Belfast you have the Catholic celebration of St. Patrick's Day. So you have a situation in Ireland where both sides celebrate things like St. Patrick's Day. This is in the Republic. This is Bundoran. This is a little coastal town where a lot of Northern Ireland Catholics go for their summer holidays. Enniskillen, cattle market. Brexit had effects on all sort of parts of society, but the guys who were the farmers were really worried about it because a lot of them farm across the border and have land on either side or trade cattle, and the problems for them at the time, they were really worried about how it was going to affect their ability to trade.
I guess at this stage we should say that Northern Ireland is the only part of the United Kingdom that is actually in the European Union single market. So no, in other words, to keep the Good Friday Agreement up and standing, they kept Northern Ireland within the European Union's trading zone. And that's a critical thing. So if you're a farmer or you're trading goods, you can move across the border between the Northern Ireland and the Republic without any checks. You're still part of the EU single market. The checks come in when you go across the border, when you go across the Irish Sea from Northern Ireland to the UK. And that obviously is the issue for Unionists who are very unhappy with their sovereignty being compromised for the sake of Brexit.
Here's an old guy who lives right on the border. He moved there in the mid-'80s, so he's seen it all through the Troubles and then through the whole Brexit shenanigans. But I think, when you're there, you talk to people there. I mean, the vast majority of people there wanted what they've got now, which is to stay in the single market. It was really the Unionists were very vocal, and also when I don't know where the people watching this are from, but if you're in the United Kingdom, if you're in England, Scotland, Wales, on the mainland here, the view we get is very different to when you're in Northern Ireland itself. In Northern Ireland, you're hearing many more Catholic voices than you're hearing here. Even now, when the First Minister should be a member of Sinn Féin and Catholic, if you on the news on the mainland, they will usually interview an Ulster Unionist first. You'll get the view from the Unionists before you get the view from the Catholics. So it's very, when you're living in the UK, we do get a skewed. One of the reasons I always wanted to go to Ireland was because we weren't allowed to hear Gerry Adams' voice. He was, from the IRA. I mean, we could hear all the Protestant guys. We weren't allowed to hear Gerry Adams. I used to think to myself when I was a kid, why can't I hear his voice?
Let's take a question while you're going through to the next one, and that's from Sarah Biffin. Go ahead with your question, please. Open your microphone. Thank you.
Do you think any chance of unification will have to wait until the death or departure of the diehards and the resurgence of the younger generation?
I guess that's one for Billy, but the point there is that there's a next generation of Unionists in the DUP anyway, isn't there, Billy?
This is very difficult to assess, and of course there's some rock stars and actors who say we're going to see United Ireland in their lifetime, and so I just take that with a pinch of salt, really. I think it'll take a considerable amount of time, differences to deal with differences, but we also have an increase in the number of people in Northern Ireland who identify themselves as other, and other means that they are not attached to their mom and dad's coat aprons. And that they're beginning to think differently. Now, those young people whose many of them who are starting to vote for the Alliance Party will make a judgment when the day comes, on Judgment Day, an Irish referendum, which certainly probably will be held within the next 8 years. They will make a judgment on whether they're economically better off in a new Ireland or remaining attached to one of the biggest economies in the world, GB.
Yeah, I guess the tricky thing there is that once you start the referendums, I think I'm right in saying is once you've had a referendum, another one has to be held every 5 years. Is that correct, Billy?
7 years.
Every 7 years. Yep. So it makes, once you've started it, it is pretty inevitable at some point there is going to be a vote for it. So it brings it closer. What are we looking at here, Andrew?
Here you're looking across the border. So you're in the United Kingdom. The horses are in the United Kingdom, and just the field behind are in the Republic. So it's kind of a seamless transition. That's near Strabane. This is Loch Earn. So you got 3 boys there from the Republic and 1 from the North. So this used to be, I mean, their parents used to have to go through it if they wanted to cross into the Republic. This is right on the border, so there would have been a British military checkpoint on the road nearby.
Billy, where do you live?
I live in Rostrevor, County Down, which looks over Carlingford's Sea Loch, which is basically on the border, on the sea border. So I can look across from my living room to the mountain across the water, which is in Europe now, and we are very similar. We're not in Europe.
Yeah, so these kids, for them, the border doesn't exist. I mean, this is one of the great things about the Good Friday Agreement. They can just mess around and they have no problems anymore as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, beautiful photograph, by the way.
Thanks. This is in Lifford, which is over the river from Strabane. Basically, very, very close together. This was a circus. This guy was going up on the Republic, but literally 2 minutes away from the United Kingdom here. You just cross the bridge. Back to marching season, Omagh. So there's a little village called Drumquin, and when I was there, I was doing in 2018 after Theresa May's speech where she said that we would leave single market and customs union, but not put a hard border up. I was discussing with the New York Times. We thought we've got to do something on this because this is just insane. It doesn't make any sense. It's an impossible thing. And I was driving from the border back through a little village called Drumquin, and at one end of the village, there was the Protestants all the kids were practicing for the 12th of July, practicing their marching band. And so I thought, I'll stop. It was a beautiful light. And I drove down through the village and I pulled in somewhere to stop. And I pulled into a car park where there was huge commotion. And I basically got dragged. And down there were the Catholic part of town, and they were celebrating a win in Gaelic football. So you had this tiny little village where at one end, complete parallel lives. One end with the Protestant end where they were practicing for the marches, and at the southern part of the village, they were, the Catholics were celebrating a win in Gaelic football, and it just brought it home to me. So I kept on going back. I've been back to Drumquin a few times, and Omagh is the nearest town. So these are just sort of daily life. I mean, daily life continues without any problem, really. And
Andrew, does it strike you, and this may be an unfair question, but Billy, chip in if you think it's necessary, but in many parts, Northern Ireland really is one of the poorest parts of the UK, isn't it? And it's now poorer than many parts of the Republic.
That certainly strikes you when you're driving around, yeah. Certainly does. Yeah. I mean, if you drove around, did a road trip through the English countryside and then did a road trip through Northern Irish countryside, yeah, the villages there's not the level of money that you see here, definitely.
We've got a question from Tim Ripley, who both Andrew and I know, and Tim was previously on the webinar we were talking about Ukraine. But Tim, go ahead with your question, please, Tim.
Yeah, Andrew, good to see you again. Good photos. I live in the northwest of England, but I also have relatives, in-laws who come from Northern Ireland, and it's pretty clear how, certainly from perspective up here, that certainly England, Scotland, Wales, you could say that they've lost the Unionists have lost the room. No one cares about them anymore over here. No one cares what happens. Their idea that they can manipulate British government opinion, British public opinion, has gone. They are almost sort of orphans in the United Kingdom. I mean, how are they reacting to this feeling that they are, they no longer have? They may want to be British, but Britain no longer wants them.
Good question. Billy.
Hello?
Yeah, both of you that question, really. Yeah.
Billy, the question is: the unions have lost the room. Nobody in the rest of the UK cares about them. How have they realised that, and what are they doing about it?
Well, it's. I think politically they've sort of put themselves into a bit of a corner, and I think they need leadership to get them out of that corner. They need friends and people of influence in both Britain and America. Now, you cannot push people into certain decisions, because if you do that, it makes things more difficult. I'm a founder of an organization called a small community organization called Arts of Wonder, based in Restrever, and we do background work with politicians from all parties, Unionists, Sinn Féin, SDLP, Alliance. We bring them together privately. We put them in a room every month, maybe twice a month, and they come back and feed back those conversations into the party. So that's trying to build things at a community level and keep all channels open. And this is very important. And I noted that earlier in the comments, like about band parades and things like that, the things that we do is that we bring together people from loyalist bands and traditional Irish musicians, and we put them in a room and we give them a meal, and we ask them to play together and share some things about their home ground. And music in any conflict situation can be very healing. So those are the kind of things that we do here.
So we've run multiple small tours in Northern Ireland before Brexit and since Brexit. And one of the things I've always been struck by is if you go to Dublin, I think there's a greater awareness among politicians in Dublin about unionist sensitivities than perhaps there is in London. It's at least generally among sort of politicians you meet in Dublin, and also the media. And I think the consensus is that if there's any kind of united Ireland or a new Ireland, it would be some kind of federal system. And as Billy was talking about earlier, how do you retain some of the advantages that the UK has? The UK's pension system is more favourable than in the Republic. The NHS is also more favourable when it works in Northern Ireland than in the Republic. So there are many aspects of life in Northern Ireland that I think politicians in Dublin are very much aware of, and notably unionist sensitivities. And so it's not, I think, coming back to Tim's question, I think there's some intelligence about that. Well, but one thing I would add is you talked about rock stars, Billy, saying that they'll be united Ireland in their lifetime. They're not alone. The Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, has also added his voice in September. He said that United Ireland would take place in his lifetime too.
Yeah, I think the Unionists certainly blew it. They had such a great position with Theresa May. They blew that, and I think they will be held to account by the Protestant community in Northern Ireland, who are deeply unhappy with them. The problem is you have this, I've forgotten the name of the even more hardline party. The TUV, I think, is the even more hardline party. So at the moment, the DUP are kind of, I think, existing on the fumes of their past glories. I mean, people are not happy with the way they've blown things over Brexit, the way that they were betrayed by Boris Johnson. I mean, that was a huge blow. And that sort of, the Protestant paramilitaries were furious about that. They were livid about the Windsor Agreement. But I think, what will happen is the alliance parties like the Alliance will grow because of that. Because Protestants, I think a lot of the Protestant community are sticking with the DUP for now because they don't have any other choice, and there's no one else they could really vote for.
I'd love to get more questions. I know we've got at least one person watching in Dublin. I don't know if he's happy to put some questions in too. He's got some views on this. What are we looking at here, Andrew?
We're looking at Drumquin again. You're looking at Father Kevin Mullen, who was the vicar or the priest in Omagh when the bomb went off, the last IRA bomb. And he is an amazing man who worked very hard to rebuild community relations in and around Omagh. He was posted to Drumquin. And when I went back one time to Drumquin, I just turned up at his church, and he sort of invited me in. It was literally just before a huge, on a Sunday morning, just before a service. Church was absolutely packed. He just got me in and put me up in front of however many hundred people were in there to explain what I was doing. And then every time I went to Drumquin, I went to see him. Unfortunately, he's just passed away a few months ago, but he was an amazing man. And here he's leading a funeral. And he actually said about the Good Friday Agreement that it had prevented a lot of lives, but in a way it had allowed entrenched positions to remain. And I think his quote was, "We can stand side by side. It's allowed us to stand side by side, but not heart to heart," which I thought was a great.
I think that's fascinating. You should say that. And I think of Bosnia too as a conflict that's frozen. You come up with a police solution that doesn't necessarily provide a long-term answer to those questions.
Yeah, I think a lot of this will be in Larne. When I was in Larne, a lot of the Protestants I was talking to were, unhappy that they were being forced again into these sectarian positions. They saw the benefit of remaining in the EU, and I think a lot of Protestants I spoke to would not be unhappy to be part of the European Union. This is a survivor from the Omagh bombing. She was. The engine block of the car actually fell on her in the middle. This woman, Pauline Hart, she's now taking art class. She's an art teacher now. But she lost one of her legs in the Omagh bomb. This is Derry, looking down from the bridge over the River Foyle. This one's interesting. When I was taking this photograph, I had to park the car and walk for 8 hours over the bridge, and I took this photo of Derry. And when I was there, I'd just been taking these photos, and there was a huge commotion on the other side over the barrier. And I kind of turned around, and at first I thought it was a fight, but then I saw a guy get out of his car and sort of jump nearly over the bridge. And what had happened was there was a 15-year-old boy had cycled up onto the bridge and was trying to commit suicide. And luckily, this guy grabbed him and managed to catch him before he went over. But this is a really huge thing in Northern Ireland now. That whether it is the residue from the Troubles or generational trauma that's going through people, but they have quite a big problem with youth suicide in Northern Ireland now, and that's one of the main challenges, I think. And things like Brexit and the bringing the hard men back, giving more powers to the paramilitaries. These things are obstacles to, and have been huge obstacles to, the peace process. And
you say, this doesn't possibly directly on suicide, but Northern Ireland, we haven't said this, Northern Ireland does not have a government at the moment. The Northern Ireland executive has not been sitting. And I think for the majority of time, Billy, correct me if I'm wrong, since 2017, there's been less time that the executive, that's the government that has been sitting, than it's been out. So at the moment, you've got the DUP led by Geoffrey Donaldson refusing to take part because of the Windsor Framework. That's the agreement that reinstitutes the border puts in a border down the Irish Sea between the rest of the UK or Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And because of that, they've refused to take part. We've got another question, I think, from my mother, Sarah Biffin. I think this is a good point here because there might be political movement. Go ahead, Sarah.
Is there any feeling that a future Labour government might make a difference to the situation and how people feel about it?
Billy, do you think an election next year in the UK might change things?
Yeah. Well, in terms of the next Labour government, I don't really know very much about what their future policy will be on Northern Ireland. It might be a little bit unclear, but of course we have had this legislation brought in by the Conservative government about previous lives lost in the conflict, in that all investigations are going to be stopped, all inquests are going to be stopped.
That particularly relates to
so no justice there. But the Labour government have promised to overturn that legislation. So that will be interesting to see, and will be welcomed by all parties, Unionists, Nationalists, Republican, etc., in Northern Ireland. So that will be interesting.
Got it. Okay. What do we got here, Andrew?
You have got Catholic school and the Falls Road. So this was a piece I did for the New York Times. We did a piece on segregated education. This is another aspect of life in Northern Ireland. The state school system is very much run and led by the Protestant community, and if you want to send your kids to one of those schools, then they will learn their history and have their education from a Protestant perspective. So the Catholic community set up their own schools, and here you have a Catholic school. This one's on the Falls Road. This one was...
And they still have some authority within the Catholic Church, or the Catholic Church has a role.
Oh, a massive role, yeah. Catholic Church has a massive role. Actually, this school, the deputy head was an ex-member of the IRA who had actually been in prison. And he was not very religious, and he was, off the record, he was saying, I can't stand all the religion, but it's still very much a religious school. But they're very, when we went into this class, they had just done a lesson on the Palestinian journalist. Her name has just escaped me, but the one who was shot dead by the IDF quite recently. They, very outward-looking, quite a left-wing kind of agenda. It was quite interesting to see. And then we went half a mile down the road to the Shankill, and this is the Protestant school there. I don't know if you can see out of the window, just got all the barbed wire. These schools, the Catholic school doesn't have this problem, but the Protestant schools were losing, didn't have enough pupils, basically. And so what they've done, which is which is a very positive thing for them, is that they're bringing in a lot of refugee children to their schools, especially to a lot of the failing schools. So you're getting quite a much more diverse group of children mixing, and obviously the refugee children are bringing all their experience into that atmosphere.
I find the echo of the Middle East conflict in Belfast surreal. If you go into a loyalist area, you'll see Israeli flags.
Israeli, yeah.
To a nationalist area, you're going to see Palestinian flags, and it's reversed.
Yeah, last time on the peace wall between the Falls and the Shankill, on the Protestant side, it's all pro-Israeli graffiti, and on the Republican side, it's all pro-Palestine. This is in East Belfast. This is the loyalist area of East Belfast. That's a Ulster Volunteer Force mural on the right, and then on the left you have the Titanic mural. So the Titanic was built in the shipyards in Belfast and was seen as a very Protestant venture. The Protestants controlled the shipyards to a large degree, and that's why you see the sort of murals to them in the Protestant areas.
Yeah, Harland and Wolff, until the Good Friday Agreement, really much a recruiter of Protestants only. It was if you wanted a job in the shipyards, you really had to come from a Protestant community.
But Belfast is you can find all this stuff if you go looking. On the edges, if you go up to West Belfast or East Belfast or near the Falls and the Shankill. But then when you go downtown, it's just like anywhere else, and you got your Elvis impersonator doing his stuff. So it's a very normal, in many respects, it's a very normal city. but then when you find the strange stuff, it's pretty out there. You know,
We've got time for one more question here before we wrap up, and we've got Richard Murphy, who's in the UK. I hope Richard's there. You there, Richard?
Yes. So yeah, I was just going to ask on social issues how you see things changing. I mean, I grew up in the Republic down in Wexford in the 1980s, and now we've seen in the Republic the same-sex marriage and abortion referendums carried by huge majorities, and how that's seen from Northern Ireland, and then what's changing in Northern Ireland.
Well, from my perspective, I'll put that to Billy. But I mean, this is a pub in Belfast. You've got your pride flag there. It was, you know, things are changing, and I think things have been changing very, very fast in Ireland. But I'll hand over to Billy for that one.
Yeah, Billy, Northern Ireland still remains the only place in the UK that's got extra restrictions on abortion.
Yeah, that's true. But I should also point out that things are progressing, and same-sex marriage, gay marriage, and things are changing. I mean, Belfast is just transformed as a city, in terms of the arts, in terms of visitors, in terms of huge number of cruise ships visiting the city. I mean, it's just it's dramatic how different Belfast is, from the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. So there's a great positive vibe in Belfast nowadays. So that is really good.
Excellent. Well, we've just got time for a few more photos, Andrew, and then I'm afraid we have.
Let me see. We're done.
You're done. Okay, excellent. Well, look, thank you very much. It's been excellent. What are you working on at the moment?
At the moment, what am I working on? Always kind of doing the Brexit stuff. Recently did a trip, which I can show you some photos of, actually, very quickly.
Right on.
This was, hold on, let me sort out all this.
I guess the main, your job in a way is sort of representing what's going on in Britain to largely a New York Times audience or to a foreign audience. We're trying to explain British politics to a foreign audience.
Sure, yeah. So this was a trip we did. I mean, Brexit has obviously been hugely contentious and a bit of I think everyone would admit it's not been what it was supposed to be. It's been a bit of a disaster all round. So we decided to go and follow a shipment of shellfish from Scotland all the way down to France. So we went up to the Isle of Mull, went out with the fishermen, who have all been pretty badly affected by Brexit. These are some of the longustines. The fisherman we went out with, he's losing £20,000 a year, he reckons, by his estimation, and mainly that's because this is the exporter who says Brexit's costing him £150,000 a year. The main problem is because there's so much more paperwork to do now. They have to bring in the catch very early, so the fishermen are losing. He's losing half a day's fishing a week, which he translates to about £20,000 a year because he has to bring his catch in early. So and especially here up in Scotland, because there's all the different islands
But Andrew, we've got rid of all that Brussels red tape.
Well, exactly. He started smoking again. He's put on weight, losing £150,000 a year. So it's been a nightmare for them. This is the fisherman. Yeah, he's losing £20,000 a year. He has to bring his catch in. So, he's losing half a day a week.
I've got a great question from Richard Murphy. He says, do you have a book that we can buy?
I don't, unfortunately. One day
you need to get your act together. Come on.
I know. I need to slow down and spend some time on the book. Yeah, it's true. So this is the unloading, and they'll have to organise. Everything's organised with ferries, with timings. It's all a bit of it's that guy. I don't know how he does it, but it's like a nightmare. And he says Brexit's just like a grenade gone off in the middle of it. So they have to get everything together. They load it up. It's all live shellfish. So the lorries are filled with these tanks with seawater, and they have to get the crabs and the shellfish and the langoustines backed here into the lorry and then off to Europe. And there's only there's a real time limitation on the whole thing, because after a certain amount of time that if any of them die in there, then they start decomposing, and bacteria gets into all the other ones, and you kind of ruin the whole batch. So they drive overnight. Here's your man. He actually voted for Brexit, this guy. He regretted it.
Yeah. Yeah.
He drives all night. Don't know how he does it. We followed. So there was myself and a journalist, and we were struggling. We really were, to keep up. It was just one of him. Drove down to Portsmouth, straight on the ferry, over to Caen in France. And then he's got a queue, basically. Then he's got to hit customs, and that really slows him down. On the British side, he has to go for a veterinary check. That slows him down. But it's really the customs and all the stuff now that's been introduced post-Brexit on the French side. And then he basically has to drive through the night, so he doesn't get much of a rest. He gets the ferry crossing, and then deliver it all in France, where it goes. A lot of it goes to France, a lot of it goes to Spain, a lot of it goes to Italy. Because the problem with us Brits, is we don't eat what we have, unfortunately. Or we were not prepared to pay for it. I mean, we have fantastic stocks of herring, mackerel, shellfish, but we don't really eat it. So it all has to go France, Italy, and Spain. And this is in France, it being unloaded.
Yeah.
And there it is on the plate.
Wow. Great story.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, fun. Tiring, but good fun.
Yeah, excellent. There, we're going to have to leave it. Andrew, I'm going to have to ask you to stop sharing your screen. You've got to hit the stop button at the top.
Oh, I've lost my mouse.
You lost your mouse. You struggle way to find it. While you're doing it, you found it there?
Yeah.
Well, that's a really good discussion. I want to thank you for your time, and also I think I don't know if Billy's still there. Billy joined us fairly short notice. So I want to thank him too for his time, and I'm thankful also to South African Communications that have just about kept with us. If you know anything about South Africa, you know that it's got power cuts and communications problems. So the fact that this has worked at all is quite an amazing thing.